What do you want?
I want to hear you scream.
Oh, yeah. We all want to hear Bill Pullman scream, don't we?
I guess.
Yeah.
That movie is...
I
I had not seen
wait
it
to get
before. I had not seen it before. Ever.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and I'm a huge Wes Craven fan. So,
right.
Yeah. And I'm also a huge David Cronenberg fan. This is going to be an interesting episode because, I don't know, it's going to
picked the films.
contentious.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, this is Film Trace.
Yes,
this
Film Trace.
Do you want to do it? Chris, you do it.
No,
I want you to do it.
I always mess up the tagline.
Do it. Just do it. I want you to do it.
Okay, we're going to see how this goes. Welcome to Film Trace. This is a show that traces the conception, production, release, and execution of a film. Is that
good.
close enough?
Good.
All
That's
right.
close enough. Yeah, that's ballpark. That's what matters.
We are joined by a guest from the other side of the world today. He's actually in the future right now. Thank you for joining us, Rob, from the Smoke and Mirrors podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah. Back from the
Tell
future.
us about your podcast.
Yeah,
Tell what's going on.
Give us the plug.
So I'm from the Smoke and Mirrors podcast, and what we do in the podcast is kind of accumulate all the movie news from the week at two different points, and we lay it out for people. Sometimes, like the title suggests, Smoke and Mirrors, there's an illusion going on to what might actually be happening, and sometimes we get it pretty accurate. We also do TV and movie reviews, and it's been a wild ride so far.
Very cool. Did you guys do Yellow Jackets yet? I think I saw that in your last episode.
Yeah. We just started the second season.
Oh God, it's so good. I was just watching that when I had to stop it for this podcast.
I know. It's the episode too.
Oh man, it's awesome. It's such a cool show. Well, thanks for joining us. What are we
Thanks
doing here? We're
me.
doing Stranger Than Fiction. I don't know what episode is this in the cycle. We're out of order, I feel like, Chris.
Yeah. We're doing the thing where we just kind of record them all and then dole them out for you guys one at a time. So we are in the midst of the fourth episode right now, covering the decade of the 1980s, based on a true story films that are, as Dan just said, stranger than fiction, based on at least kernels of truth that are then, dramatized and fictionalized to the greatest extent. And I'd go so far as to be brazen and say this is the strangest duo of films of the bunch.
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point. So what's the first film? Dead Ringers, 1988, David Cronenberg, which I had never seen before. Have you guys seen it before?
Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I've never seen it before.
Guest goes first, Rob, but then I want to share.
Sorry, I was going to say, I've got 2 kids, so working through a back catalog of anything, like, it needs to be curated. Yeah. So when you guys hit me up with the episode, I was like, thank God. I can see, like two films that are missing in the filmography of 2, like, awesome directors. But yeah, Dead Ringers, big surprise.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, so I did. I think we were kind of lockstep for a while there, right? Like the years following college, and I think my entry point for Cronenberg was A History of Violence came out. Yeah, nice. And so I immediately I had seen The Fly on TNT's Monster Vision with Joe Bob Briggs.
Of course. Yeah,
and
classic.
I had heard of Scanners and, a few other of his films. But I just started working my way through both watching and rewatching. For a lot of them, I was watching for the first time the, uncut, not censored for American cable television versions for the first time. And Dead Ringers was just like prime, like, I'm graduated from college. I have my first job, but I don't have children yet. So I have nothing to do except just watch all the stuff I never have had a chance to watch yet. And this one fucked me up, guys.
Yeah, I can imagine. How old were you?
So it was 2005, I believe, right around the time of History of Violence. So
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I was,
what's crazy is that I'm a big horror nerd fan to some degree. And I don't think I had seen a single David Cronenberg movie until 6 years ago.
Wow.
Nice.
And what happened was he always scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
Like his movie, like the body horror stuff always really unnerved me in a way. I loved like the Scream slasher stuff and all the classics. But Cronenberg was a little bit too weird for me, I think. And then speaking of Joe Bob Briggs, he had a show on Shudder. So he moved over to Shudder 5 years ago, and he featured Rabid on one of his shows. And I watched that and I was like, holy fuck.
I haven't seen that one yet.
This guy's amazing. I didn't know that he was so like a gonzo. Like he is out there.
Yeah.
Like, and there's recently a profile of him in the New Yorker about how his first film was at Shivers. Where he basically got evicted from his home because of that movie. Because someone wrote an op-ed in the Toronto Sun or something and said, this is disgusting, it's vile, and his landlord read it and then thought he was making pornography in his house. Wow. So his entire family got evicted from his house. Like this guy's like, he's not on the same plan as most people. Like he is. And then since Rabid, I've been going back and watching stuff. Like I'd never seen The Fly.
Oh, wow.
I watched that maybe 3 years ago. Mind blowing.
Yeah.
Just absolutely mind blowing. But so I was really, really excited to dive into this one because I know this is kind of regarded as one of his better films, I think people say. Obviously, some amazing performances here in it as well. How do you want to dive into this, Chris? What do you think?
Well, we got to start with what is the nugget of truth at the center of the film. And I think unlike a lot of based on true story movies, this one stemmed essentially from the discovery of the bodies of the guys that Jeremy Irons' characters are based on, which are, I mean, that is true. They were fraternal twins, not identical, but they were both gynecologists. They shared an apartment. They had their own practice together, and they were very eccentric. And they were both addicted to barbiturates.
Yes,
and a handyman had discovered their bodies in the 70s, and that prompted a novelist to adapt that for a work of fiction. But that eventually led its way to Cronenberg, and he wanted to basically kind of try to start getting out of the horror ghetto, especially in the 1980s, right? And we'll talk about Craven's attempt in the same year, but obviously there's still a lot of trappings for both of them in both of the films we're going to discuss today. I'm curious to start, like, if that's the kind of piece that we're starting with is the deaths of these two guys, which was, I think, pretty well known for anybody that was probably going to see the movie. Like, it was it shouldn't have been a surprise that you knew this was going to have a tragic ending to it. It's a whole Titanic situation. What the journey, not the destination, right? But I'm curious, like, not only was Cronenberg like trying to do something a little bit different, he was also, he also had Jeremy Irons, like one of the most like premier prestige serious actors of his time, and he was kind of pretty honestly, and was not shy about it in the press to say that like he was gunning for an Oscar. So what do you think Cronenberg and Irons were thinking, trying to like take this sort of tale and make it palatable for mainstream audiences?
I don't know. What do you think, Rob?
I think what was sort of paramount for Jeremy Irons was getting the specifics down for both Bev and Ellie. He wanted them to be completely different people, but kind of almost literally sewn at the side. Like they share the same looks, but they have different particulates about them. So like going in there with the different methods that he kind of used to separate them, but also make them the same. There were small nuanced differences.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the. I have my issues with Jeremy Irons in general. Or should we say Jeremy's Iron? Right? Okay. This is a Simpsons reference. I had to do it.
Classic.
what's I think so still impressive so many years later with his performances here is that like with so much of this kind of time period and even further into the 90s with like Multiplicity is like it was like so overdone in so many instances, and there's many like darkly comic aspects to this film, and yet I don't know, I feel like he hits the mark so well that it really is the only Jeremy Irons performance that I like think about when I think of him. But maybe that's just me because I don't really watch a lot of period dramas. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about this movie after like watching Cronenberg's earlier stuff, like even with The Fly was 2 years before this. This feels so restrained. Compared to his other stuff. And I think Jeremy Irons' performance is definitely part of that. Like he went into it with a lot of intention. There was clearly a lot of thought given to exactly how they're going to portray these characters. I mean, there had to be from a technical perspective too. Like this is one of the first times, we're really seeing 2 people on screen at the same time together, a single person as 2 people. And so Cronenberg had to do a lot of work there. And so there's a ton of intentionality across the board, going into the film. And I think the actual performance itself, it almost comes across as like subtle, which is not something that like you're going to say in a David Cronenberg movie like Videodrome or something. It's not like James Wood. And so like I think that's the one thing in the flourishes here, the typical Cronenberg flourishes, the red in the operating room, which I think he mentioned he wanted to make them look like they were like religious or like cardinals or something. And then of course the instruments that he creates for mutant women, as he calls them. Yeah. Those are like very traditional Cronenberg flashes and accents. But besides that, he plays it pretty kind of down the middle and is creating something of like a... I don't even know what you would... Chris, you mentioned that like he's trying to get out of horror. What would we call it? Rob, what would you call this? What genre would you call this movie?
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think it's horror at all. It didn't play for me like a horror. It almost played like an existential drama. You know what I mean? With thriller flourishes.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely get a lot of thriller vibes to it, and sort of like we don't really know what they're up to. They seem to be playing off of each other. It's like almost like they're keeping secrets from each other, and obviously from their lover. And then it's, it becomes this almost like a mystery to it. And when you think about how this story started, it is a mystery because it really does start from, the deaths of these 2 gynecologists, brothers. No one knows where they died. And there was a huge like Esquire article that helped to get the book going and published about how New York was sort of obsessed with these guys dying, and no one had any idea what's going on. And I think one thing to also think about too is that if you have a chance to read the Esquire article, do it because it feels incredibly close to the movie. Right. Like really close. Like it's almost like the beats in that article are represented mostly kind of in harmony with what's on screen, which is, I don't know, it might be something to do with, do you guys agree that it feels different than other Cronenberg movies, or am I kind of off base there?
No, I agree 100% with you. I mean, while it retains some of the aesthetic of other Cronenberg movies, the delve into madness, I think, was so much more internal than the external stuff that we see in other Cronenberg movies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the movie that came to mind from his filmography the most for me upon my rewatch was actually 2011's A Dangerous Method, the basic, another true story Cronenberg movie based on, the love triangle between Jung and Freud. And you have, a similar kind of love triangle between the 2 brothers and the character of Claire, which, by the way, just sidebar, like what I knew that I remembered that the actress that played the female lead here was not somebody that, I had known from other stuff, but like also I'm just so confused about where she went. And then
she was like a local, I think, right? Like because she
Canadian,
shot this in Montreal and Toronto. And she might have just been like a local actress, or
but I think she's incredible in it. I think
she's phenomenal.
Yeah. It's amazing to have somebody able to like hold their own with Jeremy Irons, like two different versions of Jeremy Irons.
Yeah.
Is pretty impressive. But like that psychological piece is as much about the kind of love story that is cut short here and like there's a lot of horror and torment in that piece of it, as well as with like the whole like identity, madness, addiction piece as well. And that really like sang for me a lot more this time, because I think perhaps, especially, in my impressionable young 20s, I was watching it and just being like, well, that's fucked up. She's chewing on Siamese twin thing and they're not actually Siamese twins. Right?
That was the one scene where I was like, oh, this feels like Cronenberg.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's like a typical Cronenberg thing.
Yeah, it also kind of feels like maybe like later days on the set, and he's like, I just got to do something, guys. Can you work this up in prosthetics for me?
Super weird with like I got to get some weird concoction out of my head. That's funny. Like remember the film opens with them as young like boys, and they basically proposition a young woman, and she's like, no, kind of fuck off. But there was I thought that was interesting when I opened the movie, and then I came across this quote from a Spin interview he did when this movie came out, and I kind of, because when you mentioned her like how everything's flowing through her, I thought it was like, yeah, what is Cronenberg trying to get at? And I thought this was an interesting quote. It's a little bit longer, but I'm going to go through it real quick. Cronenberg said, if I were a feminist, which in a non-militant way I think I am, I would say that Dead Ringers is a very astute expose of certain things. The movie is partly about the whole attitude of certain men towards women. That's what the whole opening scene with the two kids is about. If we can't figure them out, we can dissect one. Or if we can't deal with them on a personal level, we can deal with them in a control situation.
Right.
That's just like going into those scenes, you're like, oh, that is all there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like it's like overflowing with this this desire to control and to manipulate, but also there's like an implicit pleasure in it as well. It's like a weird mixture that Cronenberg's so good at doing. Like he's not, I never go into a Cronenberg movie or come out of a Cronenberg thinking that like, oh, he thought A and represented A on the screen. It's really like he's exploring the topic on the screen. Yeah. Right. He does not have a set way of thinking. I think he doesn't know when he's beginning where it's going to go. I think that's like especially true in this movie, where by the end it's such a roller coaster that I had a hard time pulling away, kind of to criticize what I just said. I had a hard time pulling away any sort of threads or thematic threads that I was connecting to. What did you guys, when you watch this, this time, like what are you pulling from it in terms of like maybe a perspective that he was giving, or a viewpoint, or any sort of, I don't think there's any moral here, but something like that. Like what did you guys pull out of it this time?
For me, it was connection. Like even that interaction at the start, the trying to sort of work out the mystery of connection. Because on a scientific basis, like we can't live underwater. So therefore that transaction of sex is almost like a puzzle that you need to figure out. And them as young boys, like trying to, a simple transaction of, will you have sex with us? Yeah. Fuck off. You know what I mean? And then the connection between them, and what I think is unknown that Cronenberg is trying to kind of explore there is the impact of, once you have that connection, the internal impact on yourself.
Yeah, and like one of the pieces of that opening scene is not just them propositioning the girl, but one of the twins, I forget if it's Bev or Ellie, but essentially finds out that there are so many species underwater that don't actually like have to have any kind of like physical mating ritual, and one of the twins says, "Oh, I'd like that." Like this, right as soon as that happened, I was like, boom, body horror just in dialogue form, right? Or it's this incredible fear of of physical connection. And that kind of plays also with this, because the thing that I was interested in watching it for a second time was trying to pinpoint kind of the things that lead up to Bev and then Ellie too eventually. But Bev first, I think, is the one that starts the kind of disintegration process of like pulling apart from himself and losing his mind with the help of drugs. But like, everything from Claire going to, shoot a movie in a different city to having to like reconcile the whole idea of sharing in a different way. Now that they, find out that they come to some kind of realization that they are two separate people and that they aren't as connected as perhaps they originally thought. I think those are equally as horrific as any actual on-screen gore. And I think it's also, that's the thing about Cronenberg. I think one of the reasons he's so effective and so beloved as an auteur is because he finds like these strange pieces of humanity that are actually really universal. Like, I think we all, maybe I'm just outing myself as a complete weirdo, but I feel like growing up, like sex is exciting when you hear about it, but it's also scary. And the idea of like breaking away from your family and like not being, living in the same house as these people every day and trying to become your own person, that's scary. And it really feels like, and I think I had a quote actually to go back to answer your question, Dan, where he kind of looked back on Dead Ringers. I don't remember if it was 20 or 30 years later. Oh shoot. Where is it? Somebody else go while I find this.
You lost it, Chris. You lost it.
Yeah,
Well,
I know.
think
Lost the thread.
So here's the thing about that. Yeah, like there's this idea of separating yourself from. The tough part about this is that the relationship between the two, it is so intimate. It is so close. It feels perverse. Right, from an emotional sort of almost incestuous level. Yeah, like this is extreme codependency, extreme. And I think like that's where I think Cronenberg is so interesting, because he's using this, and he has some line about how with The Fly he had to make the fantastic seem real, but with this movie he had to make the real seem fantastic.
That's good,
right? Yeah. So it's like he's taking a true story, he's taking something that really happened, and a lot of the beats did happen. The screw up in the slow deterioration of both of these men is a real thing, but he's making it and sort of enlivening it to the point where it becomes almost like it's tragic, obviously, but is it like a parable about being too close, about sort of codependency, like imploding like a star where you can't separate yourself from somebody else. That's where it's like he swings back and forth on it, because on one level they seem like they love each other and they're supportive of each other, so it's good. But then all this fucked up shit happens because it's Cronenberg, right? And you're just sort of like, oh, he's like, he's oddly a frustrating filmmaker in that he will never give you any clear indication. Yeah, right. It's always go for it, Chris. I can get the quote.
I found the quote now, and this ties in kind of nicely. He said that at that point in his career, he had gotten a different response to Dead Ringers than any other previous movie. Every other previous movie, he got comments about how horrific and disgusting, what they saw was. But he went to a screening in Toronto, and a doctor was in the crowd and asked him after the screening, "Can you tell me why I feel so fucking sad after having seen this film?" And so then he thought about it for a second, and he's like, I think that's what I wanted to get at, but couldn't articulate. It has nothing to do with gynecology or twins. It has to do with that element of being human, this ineffable sadness that is an element of human existence, which I think is like a more generalized version of what you're saying with like connectedness and codependency. But I think that's true, like no matter what, whether it's like a familial relationship, a romantic relationship, a friendship, or like any kind of like human connection is got this kind of built-in sadness to it about, whether how it could end or how it could be tragic or toxic or both.
Yeah.
It's like a double-edged sword, essentially, right?
Yeah. Especially with like the familial side of it. Like if you're, I don't know, we grew up in a very close-knit kind of family, like 5 people, 5 kids and 2 bedrooms kind of thing. And as soon as you kind of stepped out of being the character that you were as a member of that family and did something for yourself, people looked at you differently. You know what I mean? And it was almost like, are you a threat now? Like that's kind of the vibe that you got. Like, what, you're going to forget about us? Well, I think it's like this. You're a new person. Like I grew up with you. I expect you to act a certain way, and now you're throwing the rhythm off. Like, don't fuck with my chi kind of vibe. And it just it creates chaos in a dichotomy that just works as dysfunctionally or functionally as a family does. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that happens here with Bev and Claire, right? Because he develops a real relationship.
Yeah, and that's when the bullshit starts.
Threat. Yeah, it's a threat. It's a threat to their... But what is it a threat to when you really think about it?
Well, I almost think like, sorry.
No, go for it. No, go ahead.
I almost think that while it's kind of codependency, at times it could be parasitic because Ellie needs to get something from Bev in that exchange.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of Bev doing what he does is like serving over... What does he say? Serving over hot snatches or something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
He's so good at it. He's obviously the brains, whereas Ellie's kind of the social aspect of that.
Right. Smooth talker. Yeah. Yeah. And the scene that makes me think of the most has nothing to do with like sex or actual connection. It's like that scene where Bev comes home from an encounter with Claire, and Ellie like asks for details, like tell me all the spicy tidbits, and Bev doesn't want to, and he like clearly is acknowledging that for the first time he has no interest in like sharing. He wants to keep something for himself, and I think that was like just a really like that's a great example of like Cronenberg trying to stray a little bit from like the outwardly horrific stuff and kind of making that connection, because we've all had that experience where it's like you come home to somebody or you go out with somebody and they want you, like they want to pry, they want to like get that gossip from you, and you know, sometimes we're just like no, like try to change the subject, or like I don't know. I think that was a really good kind of microcosm of both the characters and what makes the movie kind of relatable despite how strange it is.
Yeah, and that's like the restaurant scene.
Yeah,
it's like this the tension there, and she obviously walks off because she's so upset with the situation. I do find that's an interesting point. It's like, you know, what does he want to hide, or does he want to hide anything? And what, you know, like what is he? Because I don't know, privacy. Like, does he want his own world? I think that's the thing. He wants a piece of his own little world.
Yeah,
and then he won't let him have it.
Yeah, Cronenberg joked in an interview actually that that Dead Ringers was his quote meditation on work-life balance. That idea. I mean, it's like a half joke though, right? Where it's like, you know, I can't imagine, like my wife and I talk about this. Like, can you imagine if we had to work together and then also come home to each other? It's like,
that's the reality that I had. I worked with my wife before. Well, when I met her, right? I also at the same time worked with my family. So, and the bonds are strong both ways, and it's funny. Maybe this is why Dead Ringers connected with me, because while you're kind of working through that, there's like this. Well, this is our normal process that we kind of go through, and I'm going, but I want to have lunch with you know, this person over here, and that's when the threat comes in. What do I do now?
Yeah. What's the true nature of that threat? Because I think that's what the movie's all about, right? What is the real threat there?
I think that it's, you're going to leave me. I'm going to be left alone. Yeah.
And it seems that way, I think, even near the end of this. Yeah. I mean, what's crazy about this is the true story is like even more bonkers.
Yeah.
Like it's more bonkers. Like the way that they ended up dying, they don't even know how they died. Right? They couldn't figure it out. There wasn't an overdose. They didn't have any drugs in their system, really. And I think I forget which one died. They have different names in real life, but one of them died a few days before the other.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he started like walking, like he left the apartment. He came back with his dead body face down on the bed. Yeah. And you're just sort of like, what would possess you? I mean, it's just like a.
Well, I thought that was an interesting detail. Obviously, they condensed it for the movie. He just leaves basically to go use the payphone to call Claire.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then returns. And, you know, even if you didn't know that detail that was from the true story, like it's strange, but it's also symbolic as hell. Like the place that he goes to temporarily is like a symbol of connection, right? And as soon as Claire answers the phone and, you know, he realizes that like that whole thing is gone, he's like, okay, well, back to my brother. I'm going to go, you know, die with him.
It's so
sad. It's so sad.
But I think, it's. I found the movie to be, super bleak. I think when you had that quote before about the doctor, there's another quote that came to mind from Roger Ebert. He goes, "Dead Ringers is a stylistic tour de force, but it's cold and creepy and centered on bleak despair. It's the kind of movie where you ask people how they liked it, and they say, well, it was well made, and then they wince. You know, it's like, I kind of feel that way. It's and I don't know, and this might be a little bit of a criticism because I would say, you know, I'm not a Cronenberg scholar. Like I haven't seen every film that he's made, but I've seen most of them. In this one, I think here's the thing: despite how well made it is, despite the amazing performances, I think to me there's a little bit of the playfulness that is missing from his other movies. Like Videodrome and Scanners and Shivers and Rabid, his earlier stuff was gonzo and fun and off the wall. And this is none of that, right? Yeah. It's very bleak and very cold. And so I was left, you know, after seeing it for the first time, I was left like, yeah, I really enjoyed that. And it was a really fascinating movie. And it's going to make me think a lot. But I kind of felt like my enjoyment level of it wasn't necessarily matched by his other movies. I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Or where do you guys put this in your Cronenberg sort of echelon?
You know, I definitely, it was probably like in the middle of the pile for me back when I first saw it because of that similar kind of reaction. But I also think it's perhaps a movie that rewards rewatches despite its kind of clinical bleakness. And I have to admit, like after watching it again, it might be my favorite Cronenberg.
Well, why is that though? Why?
There's something. Okay, so first off, I think a lot of the darkly comedic beats I didn't pick up on my first watch. I think the first half of the movie is like really perversely hilarious because it's so much like it's like literally like playing with the sitcom premise of like twins pretending to be like a Freaky Friday type thing, or not Freaky Friday.
You have a sick sense of humor.
Yeah, no, so does Cronenberg, right?
True, very true.
And I think that there's like this. I don't know. There's this like kind of tone that he hits that just feels not only like, you know, his best work elsewhere in his filmography, but also is just like, I can't think of another movie that hits the way that Dead Ringers hits. And like,
that's a good point. Yeah.
I think like from like the iconography of like the what they wear in surgery to the sculptures cloaks of the instruments for mutant women, and then just like I also love that I could watch this movie a second time. Yeah, admittedly, like, you know, 18 years later, but still, like I could watch it for a second time, and the only thing I really remember is that it's got great acting and those images that are unforgettable, and it still felt like a journey. It still felt like there's so many pieces that could be interpreted in so many ways, kind of like you were saying at the top of the show, Dan. But I do agree that it's a difficult watch. I also know that I just got a Videodrome on Blu-ray, and I need to rewatch that for the first time in 20 years.
That movie
might be
literally implodes my mind.
That might be my favorite, despite the presence of James Woods.
Rob, what do you think? Where would you put this this movie in your opinion of Cronenberg films?
So, I guess for me, story-wise, it's probably the top of what I've seen of Cronenberg. I haven't seen everything. But in terms of entertainment, just pure entertainment value, I would probably go The Fly. But this had so much going for it. I mean, this is the first watch for me, but it captured so much. And there is a fear of when you're in that sort of the operating room, the hospital, the delivery suite, when your wife's in labor, it's a scary feeling. And this happened to just capture that tension the whole way through. And it's not just straight tension, like horror tension. It's tension, but then there's also like this underlying adrenaline vibe where you don't know what's going to happen. And just how close they were as brothers and whatnot, and that linkage there, it is kind of unmatched, and you don't expect it to be as hard hitting and as impactful as it actually is, because the movie, by like action entertainment sort of standards, it doesn't hit those high beats of there's something happening every 10 pages or whatnot. Right, but in terms of the relationships between the two of them and Claire and the roller coaster ride that they go through, it's amazing on a personal level. Like, I can't imagine Stewart and Cyril Marcus going through this day by day, but I can see the simplicity of death. And this might be a little bit bleak, but the simplicity of death because of the twins. Because living a double life, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about the chaos that would ensue from trying to hold your brother up or sharing every little detail. And that's stressful, you know what I mean? So I kind of get where they were going at the end, and it's a scary thought, but it's Cronenberg, so you go with it, right?
Go into the darkness with him.
Yeah.
Two fun facts before we move on. I would be remiss to not mention the fact that when this movie was in production, it had the working title of Twins. And of course, we know why. 1988, they had to find a new title. And, I think it ended up being for the better.
Yeah, he got paid off. I read that in the spin article. He got paid off for it.
Yeah. So, get that bag, David. Right. I think very much made this movie not just because he wanted to get out of that kind of pigeonhole, but I think it's important to note that he also fought tooth and nail with Dino De Laurentiis, the famed 80s producer, set up his own production company to keep the project going, and the initial financial backers for the movie started circling the drain as soon as they started getting more details other than the fact it's from the guy who did Scanners and The Fly. As soon as they get the log line, it's wait a second, I don't know if this is actually gonna turn us
a lot
of
money in this.
Right, exactly. But yeah, I do think that you guys make fair points. I think I might just be more depressed than both of you. So, and we do have to mention, right? And you mentioned this, Rob, when we were DMing about setting up the episode. Is of course it's good timing to talk about Dead Ringers because it's being rebooted by Rachel Weisz. And Alice, I forgot her last name, but Succession writer, and it's going to be a
Is it a movie series. Or a series?
It's a series.
Wow. I guess that makes sense. Yeah. I don't know. I'm skeptical a little bit, but it's going to be fun watch. It's going to be a fun watch.
It will be interesting, especially in the wake of your comment about Cronenberg's, feminist reading of the story. And
yes, that's true.
With women at the center, but they are lesbians. And So I don't know how that'll play into it from a LGBTQ angle too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Let's talk about a little Serpent and the Rainbow.
Oh, yeah.
Wes Craven. Never seen this before. Huge Wes Craven fan. I don't know why I avoided this one.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
It just looks dumb. It always looks stupid to me.
It totally looks dumb.
Right. And I'm like, I don't really, and I had never heard good things about it. I kind of always started like, yeah, you can kind of skip this. It's not like top tier Craven. What's your guys' story with this movie? You guys seen it before? Or is this first watch?
First watch for me too. I actually thought this movie was about vampires. Because with the poster, and I thought Bill Pullman was actually a woman. Weirdly, the first time that I seen the poster, I was like, there is a woman in a coffin with a cross on her head.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean? So hearing that he was in the film and actually seeing it, I was like, I was completely wrong. I'd never heard anything about the movie before. So this was wild for me. So
I had a kind of weird journey with this movie because I often got it mixed up when I was younger with The Lair of the White Worm, which
totally
has like a similar kind of vibe, even if they don't have anything else other in common other than like they have some pretty outrageous things happen in them. But I had kind of a phase in middle school where like I'd watched Tales from the Crypt and there was at least one voodoo related episode. And so, I did check out some books from the school library about Haiti and voodoo. And I think I love it. I had at least one teacher that was concerned about me.
But then, it sounds like something exactly something I would have done.
Yeah. But then, similar to, like how I came across Cronenberg with The Fly, early on as a movie geek, this was on basic cable, and I don't think it was Monster Vision, but it was definitely just like like I had flipped it on, not knowing what it was, not knowing that it was Wes Craven, even though at that point I probably had seen at least Nightmare on Elm Street and Swamp Thing, and just like got drawn in because obviously I was kind of obsessed with like learning about the fact versus fiction aspects of voodoo. So, but I mean, I hadn't watched it since I was a kid, and I don't think I actually ever watched it in full, and definitely hadn't watched it uncensored. So this was kind of more of a first watch for me than Dead Ringers was.
Nice.
What do we think? what about the true story about this? Right.
Yeah, so we got to start there, and then we'll get into how well we think they executed it.
So it's a guy from Harvard, right? Harvard anthropologist writes a pretty famous book by the same name, kind of makes a splash, and this comes out 5 years later, maybe less.
Yeah,
3 years later.
3 years later. Yeah. So really quick turnaround. The book's criticized a bit. He goes down to Haiti to study the voodoo religion, and it seems like a little bit of like creative nonfiction. Yeah, where he's maybe taking liberties with his story, and it seemed a little bit too like too well curated, the story itself. I don't know. Did you know anything about the book? You ever heard about it before?
Never.
No, I didn't. Based on my slight memories of my middle school phase, like I knew about this idea of zombification as a part of voodoo culture and the religion, and that there was a lot of skepticism about it, how much it actually made someone die and then come back to life. But other than that, like, no, I did not know about like the actual, attempt by an American to, legitimize basically this aspect of voodoo in the Western world. That seems like especially like, after having gone to college and knowing everything about, colonization and dictatorships and all that from Caribbean history, it's actually, I think, kind of incredible that not only did Wes Craven adapt that book, but that he kind of, you could definitely make an argument for the second half of the movie, but I'd say at least the first half of the film does at least a decent job at being respectful to the culture and people of Haiti, despite the fact that it's, once again, a white protagonist. and see it through that lens.
I don't know. Did you guys feel I didn't get a huge sense of exploitation happening here?
Right.
Obviously, it's going to be because it's a Hollywood movie shooting down there. They got to pay people. There's money going back and forth. There's some exploitation obviously happening. But I think from your perspective, like the story and stuff, it seems like it is trying to delve into the reality of that world.
Right. At least considering the time period. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, Rob, what'd you think?
No, I don't think it was exploitative at all. I'm pretty sure Wes Craven wanted to shoot on location, but because of everything that was happening during the time, he had to leave and go to the DR, Dominican Republic. But I guess from a story character point of view, you have this Harvard anthropologist going into indigenous communities, paying them basically peanuts, and then taking it back and making a mozza over in the States and Big Pharma.
Yeah, I mean, that whole part of it is like, it's interesting because when I'm watching it, I'm sort of like, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense why this is happening and why this is going on. But it didn't necessarily feel like Craven was doing that satirically. I mean, it's part of the actual story, but it didn't seem like he was doing it over the top to satirize that. I don't know. Am I being too harsh on him? Do we feel like he was trying to push that and be like, oh, this is obviously bullshit and Big Pharma is like, destroying these people and it's all a lie and facade? I don't know.
I mean, I think that was
not really a political filmmaker, though, right?
Right. Well, I mean, we talked. This is our second Craven film for the show, right? We did Last House on the Left when we were discussing the birth of, self-aware horror. And I don't remember. Did we mention on the show the theories out there about how it was actually a Vietnam protest film?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that I mean, he said all that, right?
Right.
Like it definitely was an attempt to do that, but like. In that movie, I will buy that in that movie because it was absolutely fucking nuts what they were doing. Like it was insane. Like they should have been arrested for making that movie. But with this one, it's sort of like, I don't know. He seems to be pulling a lot of punches to get like a good movie or what he thinks is a good movie on screen.
Or an entertaining movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's fair.
The love scene. Come on.
It was Craven's first love scene?
Oh,
I don't think I've seen a Wes Craven love scene.
Well, I mean, there's nothing in the Last House on the Left you could call that.
Come on.
Well, I'm just saying. But yeah, I felt that was like, what? Hammy? Like, what's going on? It's so I couldn't stop thinking about the difference between Wes Craven and David Cronenberg. Like watching these movies back to back, and both, obviously in the horror genre. Whereas, like, I think Cronenberg never pulls punches. Dead Ringers, he doesn't pull punches because he just wanted to make a different type of film, I feel like. But if you look at the rest of his career, he's never interested in making like a super blockbuster film. It's just not his thing. He flirts with it. Like The Fly is a good example. He flirts with it a bit. Yeah. But even like his most recent movie, Crimes of the Future, there's nothing marketable about that film. Zero. Most of his movies are like that. Whereas Craven, while he's also an intellectual like Cronenberg, he wants to entertain people.
Yes.
He wants to make a movie that is palatable, and he thinks about that a lot. And I think that you can see that in The Serpent and the Rainbow. He wants to make an engaging, scary movie. Yeah. Did you guys see that, or is that did it work?
I mean, I might make the argument that he was trying to have his cake and eat it too. He did do an interview with Fangoria when the movie came out, and he self-described the film as a, quote, adult political thriller. And then so I do think that that's kind of where there is a little bit of overlap between what kind of Cronenberg is doing at this point in his career and then Craven. I think it backfired on him, unlike Cronenberg. But I don't know. I want to give Craven a little more credit that he was at least aware of it, if not really paying too much attention to how to necessarily make that happen in the final product.
Well, yeah. Rob, what do you think? Who do you got?
I mean, I reckon that what he was trying to do was show you that the process of zombification was real, but through factually breaking down that it's a state that you can be put in through these narcotics. You know what I mean? And that's where he was kind of drawing the fear from. But I definitely got the political aspect with the tensions rising in Haiti during that time, and I think that's where he kind of drew from. But then by the end, it just goes full on like genre, like straight into his roots.
Shocker.
Yeah, like he's going like full Nightmare on Elm Street with some of the sequences, and it just. I think at that point it kind of drops in quality.
Right.
Yeah,
and
I would agree. Yeah.
One of the pieces, other than like, the just like ridiculous fight sequence between. You should never have Bill Pullman in a fight sequence, first of all.
It's so bad.
It's really bad. But two things. Like, I am still gonna like defend the visual prowess of Craven here. Like, there was some things going on throughout, and I think that's one of the things he plays with well. And it's almost like he's a little bit of building off of the Nightmare on Elm Street style, right? Of that like disconnect between dreams and reality, and also like some of the effects recalled for me. And once again, Dan and I rewatched this recently, or I rewatched it. He saw it for the first time. The 70s Japanese film House.
Yep.
With like a lot of the composite effects and the use of color and all that I think that's still interesting and fun to watch. But then the other piece, which is that, the main antagonist Petro is pretty awfully depicted throughout as just like, the all out evil. But then there's the character of Mozart, the guy that gets them the drug, and that I think that's like how his character ends at the end, where he's just like, you know what, here, have the drug anyway, bring it back to Big Pharma. Where it's like, okay, maybe there wasn't really too much thought put into how to wrap this all up in a way that is actually trying to say anything about the political climate of Haiti.
I mean, he tried. There's definitely there's definitely an attempt here. And like, there's also a parallel to the book. I didn't read the book, but I like watched the YouTube video of some guy reviewing the book, so I have some knowledge of it. But it's like the tie of tying in like the zombification with authoritarianism and how it's like controlling people. Like that's apparent in the movie. Like, it's very clear, and it's also a big point of the book as well. I think he, like, Craven, I love him to death. He's one of my favorite filmmakers by far, but he can't really, it's almost like when he has his own original idea. Last House on the Left was him. Nightmare on Elm Street was him. That was his entire concept. Scream as well. I mean, well, it's Kevin Williamson, but it's kind of his sort of like viewpoint of horror movies and slashers, and like doubling back on his own career. When it's like a whole nother sort of an idea that doesn't come from his past or kind of his creative fountain or whatever, he struggles. Like, it just, it never felt like, to me, Craven really understood the source material all that much, or maybe didn't have a lot of respect for it. Because it just, the whole thing, or maybe it was just a failed attempt. I don't know. Whatever it is, I think, Chris, you're right. The visuals are cool. Like the snake thing out of the zombie's mouth is pretty awesome. It's lovely. And then, the performances are, who's the female lead? She was from Mona Lisa.
Yeah, Kathy Tyson.
Yes. She's great, but it's just, the whole thing feels like it's just kind of like a narrative house of cards, and then by like the last half hour, it just collapses. And you're just like, I mean, that's kind of my viewpoint of it. To me, it definitely is. If you're a Wes Craven fan or a horror fan, definitely watch it because there's some redeeming things. But when I compare it to something like Dead Ringers, it's not even in the same ballpark.
No, right? Definitely not. It's fun. It's fun trash that has some pieces in it that can be picked apart and considered, but definitely not much more than that.
I kind of want to read the book though.
Yeah,
because the book sounds bonkers,
right? And
like
the zombie drug, despite probably not actually causing death and resurrection, it does seem to cause like a enslaved style comatose.
Yeah, it's like a derivative, like the pufferfish poison,
right?
I think, is what they use.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole. I mean, obviously, there's a reason why like 12-year-old me checked out a book on voodoo, but like,
well, it does seem like such a fascinating religion.
Yeah,
and like it's very like hierarchical, and there's layers to it. It's not just like this. Oh, we drug people and make them into zombies. There's like a whole super complex system that's going on with all these different beliefs and sort of tokens and iconography. So it's kind of cool in that aspect, and you get that sort of like an anthropologist going into this completely foreign place and trying to understand the system that is so convoluted and different. But then he tries to wrap it in kind of a schlocky B zombie movie, and it's like it's tough. It's like that intellectual richness for some reason doesn't fit into what he was trying to do. Where it's like, what if David Cronenberg directed this? That would be amazing. I feel like he would like have the ability to really hit it out of the ballpark. Should we do some trivia?
Yes, let's round this off.
Right.
Okay, here's how it works, Rob. I've got 5 synopses. So I'm going to describe a film to you, and it's a film based on a true story, and you tell me whether they actually made a movie out of that strange true story or not. Is the film that I'm describing real or fake?
Chris is good at this, so just be warned.
Okay. Number 1, we're looking at the year of 1982. From new German cinema auteur Wim Wenders comes this meta-take on noir, based on a true story experienced by Maltese Falcon novelist and former private eye Dashiell Hammett. He once got caught up in the later years of his life with a case that drew him out of retirement. It concerned a missing Chinatown prostitute, a $1 million blackmail scheme, and a stolen Pulp Fiction manuscript by Hammett himself. Was that an actual movie?
That's got to be false.
I'm going to say, I'm going to agree with you, Rob. I think that's false.
It's true.
God damn it! I told you it was good.
It's called Hammett, and it was the brainchild of producer Francis Ford Coppola, who supposedly re-ghost directed and reshot the whole film when execs at Orion saw Wenders' cut and called it, quote, too European.
Oh my God. Can we see this? Can we add this? This sounds amazing.
I know. I totally want to see it now. Okay. Next one. 1983. From choreography legend and writer-director Bob Fosse comes his only non-musical effort, a dramatization of the scandalous true story of a Playboy bunny whose tragic rise and demise is wrapped up in romantic intrigue, a sleazy agent, and allegations against Hugh Hefner himself.
Well,
I almost think that's true as well.
I'm going to say that it's false.
Rob's got one on you, Dan. That one is true. It's a movie I almost picked for this episode because it sounds so fascinating. I had no idea that Bob Fosse made a non-musical movie, much less one based on a true story about a Playboy bunny who gets murdered. It's called Star 80. Mariel Hemingway was the lead, and Eric Roberts plays the agent, and he got a Golden Globe nomination for it.
Nice. Eric Roberts.
Yeah, I know. Okay, next one, 1986. From the filmmaker behind The Who's Tommy and Altered States comes the sordid retelling of an infamous night in British literary history, when Frankenstein author Mary Shelley and Romantic poet Lord Byron, among other notable luminaries of the time period, spent an evening together sharing ghost stories under the influence of experimental drug compounds.
True.
I want to say it's false.
That one's true as well. I know.
I've heard that story before. I've heard that story.
The classic teacher trick of 3 in a row of the same answer. Okay. That's by Ken Russell, who did Lair of the White Worm. It's called Gothic, and there's actually been 4 different iterations of this story being retold, either on TV or in movies.
Because I remember hearing about that whole, them like telling ghost stories together.
Yeah. Very interesting.
That's so cool.
Oh, 1 left, 2 left.
2 left.
Right.
1987. From the director of Repo Man and Sid and Nancy comes this wild and unconventional Western, featuring music by The Clash's Joe Strummer, who also has a cameo in the film, and based on the real life of William Walker, an outrageous lawyer and journalist that declared himself president of Nicaragua in the 1850s, played by Ed Harris.
I want to say this is false.
So do I. I want to say false too. False.
This is also true. I did 4 in a row for you. I know.
He's going to do 5 in a row. He's a. What is this called?
Alex Cox was the director. The movie's just called Walker. It was the rare movie that received 0 stars from both Siskel and Ebert.
Oh, nice. Love that.
Must see.
Yeah. I gotta see that. How do you declare yourself president of Nicaragua? Wow.
I guess you just do it.
Right. 1989. Last one, guys.
Okay.
Based on a spree of murders in Japan known as the Alice Killings, this adaptation, transplanted to Miami for American audiences, was by Louis Teague, who made 1982's Cujo. Stars Christopher Walken as a grizzled detective tasked with putting together the clues of several seemingly unconnected crime scenes wherein each corpse is accompanied by a single playing card with the word Alice written in blood on it.
I'm going to say true.
Yeah, this sounds true.
This one's the false one, guys.
But
I think David Fincher should make it, and you can just
that
call it.
Cool. Isn't the Alice? Is that Alice Killings real though?
Yeah, that's real.
Okay, so I thought so, because I've heard
been a movie
before.
made about it yet.
Gotcha.
Which, why not? Why not? That seems like prime Fincher material.
Yep, and still cast Walken though.
Yeah.
You could. Mindhunter season 3.
Oh God, don't torment me.
It's never coming back. Rob, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
What do you guys got to have coming up on your podcast soon?
So we just watched Air. We just got a preview. Went to a preview screening of that. Evil Dead Rise as well. It's coming.
Yes, I cannot wait for that.
Coming up really soon. We just got invited to that one too. So
excellent, man.
And of course, more Yellow Jackets. More everything else.
Nice. Yeah, I recommend the show. It's a great way to get caught up on movie news while on your commute. It's called Smoke and Mirrors. Where can people find you? The usual places?
Yeah, all the social media, including TikTok, YouTube as well. Yeah, we're everywhere.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank
we'll
you.
be back. What's next with Film Trace, Chris? What do we got? We got
1970s. You picked the movies this time.
Oh yeah, Dog Day Afternoon and Straight Time.
I'm excited. I've never seen Straight Time.
It's gonna be a fun one. Awesome. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.